Hello, and welcome to Noble Rain Ministries Study Along. I'm Ericka, and today we're talking about Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Pardon me if you hear me clear my throat a few times. I'm sorry, allergies. But I'm going to treat this series like you're unfamiliar with Genesis. So let's start with a little bit of background. So before we start reading even a single verse of Genesis, I want to set the stage because context will change everything. Genesis wasn't written while Adam and Eve were standing, comfortably in a lush green garden. Moses wrote Genesis centuries later in the midst of the wilderness. And so Moses actually wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And together, these books are called the Torah. And the Torah is simply a word which means instruction or teaching. So don't be afraid when you hear Torah. It's not us. It is us. Okay, we're kind of one. And so Genesis came sometime between 1446 BCE and 1406 BCE. And 1406 BCE is, I think, the year that Moses died. So it was after the mass exodus when they left Egypt. Let my people go, Prince of Egypt, all of that. This is happening after the mass exodus from Egypt, and it's during Israel's 40 years in the wilderness when they were out there wandering and walking. And so it's coming after receiving God's law at Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments and all that. And so Moses is sitting in the middle of the desert, writing to a nation of former slaves. And that's what we're looking at right now when we get into Genesis. And so for over 430 years, the Israelites had lived in Egypt, and Egypt was seeping into them. It was influencing their mindset, their behaviors, the way they thought and went about their lives, their worship. And as a Black American, I can totally relate to that because you drop my people in a new territory for half a century. We've adapted here. We've assimilated to this culture. And not only have we assimilated, but we've created a brand new culture, our own culture in this land. And we've become deeply embedded into this territory. We built it. We are the ones who made the bricks. We're the ones who laid it. We maintain it. But still, we're not considered equals in the land that we inhabit, the land that we built. And so we're also not on one accord as far as our beliefs about the one true God. We're divided in our faith. And so, like I said, I can relate. So with the Israelites, generation after generation, they grow up surrounded by Egyptian religion, Egyptian values, all these Egyptian gods, the Egyptian ways of understanding the world. They saw Pharaoh treated like a god, not a man, but a god. They watched the Nile, a river, being revered as sacred, as holy. They watched the sun, the moon, the stars be associated with different gods. This one, that one, that one. That's what they grew up into. So there was a God for everything. Everything created was worshipped instead of the creator being worshipped. So now Moses is writing to the people who they've never seen the Garden of Eden. They've never met Abraham. They've never met Isaac or Jacob. Everything they know about their ancestors has been passed down through stories. And it's a lot like how we pass down stories. And I'll give you an example of that. How do all of us know bubblegum in a dish? Or shame, shame, shame. I don't want to go to Mexico. No more, more, more. Or Miss Mary Mac, all dressed in black, black, black with silver buttons all down her back, back, back. Okay, how do we all know that? Because as I'm saying it, I'm sure you can hear it in your mind. You can even go further than I did and finish it. So was there a handbook being handed out when we were children? Was there some sort of curriculum that we were all taking and studying for? Like some sort of written test? Did we all have social media as children? No, we did not. Was it on TV? No. But somehow it's ingrained in all of us, and word for word, we can all remember what color Mary's buttons were. They were silver. Somehow we all remember that it was bubblegum that was in that dish. It wasn't gummy bears. It wasn't Nurse Rope. And we know that we all didn't want to go to Mexico. Puerto Rico was fine, but somehow Mexico, you can't go there. And that's how strong oral traditions are. The details do stay. A lot of people say that we get lost, the details get lost and stuff, and maybe some fine details do. But I would say more, instead of getting lost, they're changed purposefully. So that's how strong oral traditions are. The details do stay, and the stories do stay preserved. So the details of the past were still being passed down. But after centuries of slavery, yeah, those memories needed to be refreshed and anchored in the true God again. So imagine you've been delivered from slavery in Egypt. You've crossed the Red Sea to escape and begin a new journey. You've met God at Mount Sinai. You've received his commandments. And now you're beginning to ask questions like, who is this God? Who are we? Where did we come from? Before this, before we were slaves, what were we? Why did God choose us? And Genesis is now answering those questions for you. So Genesis isn't just about telling the Israelites how the world began. It's about reteaching them who their God is, who they are, and how they've been called into relationship and purpose. It's a wake-up call saying, remember who you are. Like Mufasa and Simba, remember who you are. You belong to the one true King, to God. Remember who the true God is and the power that he holds. And so every page of Genesis is correcting something that the Israelites had been taught by the surrounding culture. Notice that the surrounding culture doesn't always tell you what's right. It's just a reflection of, what has gone wrong as far as retellings of oral traditions. Deviations. Doesn't reflect the truth. It can reflect deviations. And so be careful when you're basing everything you believe off of the surrounding culture. It's better to go off what God is telling you. Anyway, in the creation story Moses gives the Israelites is a direct challenge to the creation stories of the cultures around them. Because those stories would claim that the world came into existence through wars or between competing gods clashing. And I know this is Greek, and I know this is a little bit further into the future, but it makes me think of Clash of the Titans. So they were believing that, the gods are competing, and that's how, you have all this rebel and this in between and yada, yada, yada. But they had the tendency to view humanity as an accident or as slaves created to do the God's labor. But Genesis gives us a different narrative. There's no battle going on in Genesis. There's no rival equal to God to fight with him. There's no chaos that threatens him. There's nothing that he's afraid of. There's nothing that he doesn't tame. And so in Genesis, one God speaks and all of creation obeys his voice. And so Moses is reintroducing Israel to a God who does not struggle for authority. He does not have to fight for it because he already has it. It belongs to him. And so that's why the creation story is so revolutionary. Moses was coming against Babylonian and Sumerian stories, Egyptian stories. Like, here's an example. Ancient Egypt had a myth that to me sounds like it's derived from the truth, but it veers off at some point. It sounds like something God created had the desire to be like God and to be worshipped like the uncreated God, to the degree that they would lie and take credit for God's work in order to steal our praise. And so this is the story. They said that the universe began as a dark, infinite, chaotic, primeval ocean, which is true, called Noon. Now that one's new. And they're saying that the sun god, Atum or Ra, spontaneously emerged from the water onto a primordial mound of dirt. And that loneliness drove Atum to create the other gods Shu and Tefnut through masturbation, spitting, or sneezing. And honestly, that just goes completely off track. It's a lie. Not only is it a lie, it's disgusting. Because who would even... I'm not even going to go on that track. But another account says that the god Ptah, or however you pronounce that, created the world. and all things, including other gods, towns, and animals, first formed as thoughts within his heart and were brought into existence when he spoke their names. And you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like how the real God speaks things into existence. So you see, these stories don't come from nowhere. They're not just completely made up with no truth in them. There's truth in them. They have a common origin, but people and entities do make changes that divert the fear of God and the praise elsewhere. It's like the lowercase God in question is trying to become the uppercase God, but a created being can never stand equal or surpass the uncreated. It just doesn't happen. So here's another interesting point, in my opinion at least. In Egyptian mythology, humans were basically created as an afterthought. But in Genesis, God is basically letting us know that we're created in his image. We're entrusted with dominion over creation. And that's a major difference in the way that our gods view us who serve them. We're not in slavery. We're in sonship. That's stewardship and relationship. I was saying that it's not slavery. It's sonship. And it's more of a relationship, you know? And so I want to jump to another track. I want to talk about another pattern that we begin to notice as we walk through Genesis. We get to see how God creates the world and he uses that as like a prototype, and he reproduces that. He uses us to reproduce that over and over again. And so how does he do that? He creates the world, and later he instructs Israel to build the tabernacle. And so there's the tabernacle, and then there's the temple. Then there's the second temple. And so what does God do? He forms spaces. He fills those spaces. He blesses those spaces. He sets those spaces apart. And ultimately, his presence dwells among those spaces. And so that also reminds me of how we dedicate things to him today. Like we do home dedications, baby dedications, but mostly I want to stick with building dedications and home dedications because that has to do with building the house. If the Lord builds this house and it'll stand, it has to do with building these houses, filling these spaces, blessing these spaces, setting them apart. Because that's what consecration is to set apart for God. And so ultimately his presence dwells wherever he's invited. And so, like I said, the tabernacle and later the temple. And so from the very beginning, God's desire has never simply been to create a world. That's just a flat desire right there. There's no dimension to that. His true desire is more layered. He wants to dwell with his people. He wants to be the center of his people and for his people to gather around him like children gathering around a grandfather or an ancestor or a father, because he's all of these things in one to us. He's a central figure. And so there's layers to it. And so I don't want you to look at Genesis as if it's only about how did everything begin, It's about dust. It's about creation. It's about this. It's about, yes, it is. But that's not all. The question that we should ask also is what kind of God begins the story this way? Because Genesis is more than the beginning of a universe. It's the beginning of God's relationship with you. It's the beginning of calling you closer into a relationship with him, into fellowship. And so I'll go ahead and get into it. Let's start with verse 1. And my plan is that we go line by line and just take things slowly. That's why I'm spending so much time on just verse 1 for the first video. And then as we go on, I'll start grouping scriptures together. Well, verses together. And so verse 1, we talk about in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And hopefully I have the Hebrew version on the screen, because if I try to pronounce these Hebrew versions, I'm going to butcher them and you're going to be like, what? And I'm going to be like, I don't know. I'm sorry. And so in the beginning, This is where the book of Genesis gets its name, because Genesis means origin, and Genesis means in the beginning. It means at the start. And so when we look at Hebrew words often carry layers of meaning, from the letters that make up the words to the word itself. And so that's why I like to include the Hebrew for you to see, so that you can do whatever deep dives you want to do on your own. And so also you can follow along. And there's a really good site that you can look at if you choose to. It's learnhebrewforchristians.com. And so the very first letter, I put it on the screen. And this letter means house, dwelling, family, or what's inside. And you already start to get a picture of where I'm going, right? Because we start in Genesis. We're talking about God's house, dwelling, family, what's inside. And so I think that's pretty awesome, because we're introducing the idea of a home. You know, I read a book, and I think it was it high school or university, but it was a book called They Tell Me of a Home. And that title always stuck with me, because when I look at the forefathers in the Bible, when I look at people today, everyone's always searching for belonging. Everyone is always searching for something that they feel like they've never had, but they wonder if it exists. And it's like the feeling of continually searching for a home. And so I feel like I love this, because it's telling us that there is a home. There is a resting place. There is a place of comfort, of safety, of belonging, of personal identity. It exists. It's out there. And it's at the very beginning of what God is bringing to you in his hand and presenting to you. He's saying, I'm telling you of a home. It's right here. I have one for you. And so this is where we start to feel at ease, like things are finally right, and like we're where we're meant to be. So before God ever tells us about a sin condition, before he even brings up what we did wrong, before he tells us about judgment, before he goes and say, well, you know, I had things set up all perfect and stuff and you done ruined it, he doesn't jump into that. It's like, before you tell people what they doing wrong and how they messed up, you got to build a rapport with them. They have to be able to trust you and know that you have their best interest at heart. They have to know that you care and that you love them. You can't just come in and drop a boom, you need to stop. Or you can't just come off the bat at people like that, because it's going to be like they're going to tune you out, or they're going to hate the what you're trying to tell them, what you're trying to express to them, and you're not going to get the desired result. And so before God tells us about sin, before he tells us about his judgment, and even before he explains to us about the covenant that he's created with us, he reveals himself as a God who prepares a home for us. He's saying, you have somewhere to go. You have an identity with me. Let me remind you of who you are. Let me talk you up for a bit. Let me speak life into you for a bit before I, tell you to tighten things up, before I, give you instruction. I want to build you up first. And so Genesis doesn't start with the courtroom and cross-examining. It starts with the home, with love, warmth, family. I'm your father. I'm your creator. And that's the heartbeat of the entire Bible as we go through. He wants to continually remind us of who he is to us, who we are to him, the importance of that. It's not about beating you up or, pushing you one way or another. You need to get this right. You need to get this right. Yes, you do need to get it right. But first, I want to establish that I love you. And so from Eden to the tabernacle, to the temple, and to Christ dwelling among us, to the Holy Spirit dwelling within us, and finally to Revelation, where God dwells with his people forever. All throughout the journey of the Bible, God has always desired a relationship and fellowship with us first and foremost. And so it's about family living in peace and safety. So the aim of the Bible isn't just about getting you into heaven for the sake of being in heaven, because what's that? You don't even know anybody in heaven outside of God. So why would you want to be in heaven just for the sake of being in heaven? God's aim is to bring you into his household. I'm not just bringing you to a place to drop you off and leave you homeless. I'm bringing you where I am so that you can live with me. You have a relationship with me. And so I want to continually love you so that you can trust and have a supportive foundation. That's what God is saying. And so you're not just an employee. You're someone that God has decided intentionally. He made that decision. He wants to share eternity with you. He wants to share his eternal life with you. And so you can come into the house. And not only can you come to the house, you can open the fridge and get whatever you need out of there. If you need healing, get it from the fridge. You need appreciation, get it from the fridge. You need someone to talk to. He's right there. You can go upstairs. You can hug him. You can curl up at his feet or on his lap. You're one blood. And so the next letter we get to, I'm going to put that up too. And this letter means being the head, the beginning, chief, leader. And so notice the trend that we're seeing. Notice that he's showing us his creation process and his leadership within the Trinity. And so you can take that as Genesis, the beginning, God, the chief, the leader. It's the head. And so also leadership, the head of the Trinity. So before God ever asks us to lead, he leads first. Before he asks you to do anything, he shows you, this is how I create. Watch how I create in these 6 days. And then I rest. So that means I want you to create and I also want you to rest. And so he shows us principles is what I'm trying to get at before he expects them from you. And that's good leadership. And so before God ever gives humanity dominion, he demonstrates what it's like to steward, what it's like to, have the sun to dictate to, have the moon to dictate to, have the stars to dictate to, have the vegetation, the seas, the skies to dictate to, and the steward to take care of, the animals to take care of. I make sure they eat. I make sure they find shelter from the rain, from the heat, and all of that. So he's leading first before he shows you, before he gives you dominion. Let me give you an example of what it looks like. So it's modeling responsibility. That's God's pattern. And he doesn't ask us to become something that he hasn't first demonstrated or revealed about himself, because the whole thing is about you reflecting his character, you reflecting him, everything that he's comprised of. And so real leadership leads by example. It prepares you before placing you someplace and turning you loose. And that's exactly what God's doing in Genesis. He's preparing the environment to embrace you and react well depending on how well you emulate him. I'll say that again. He's preparing the environment to embrace you and to react well depending on how well you emulate him. Because all creation responds to him and his word. So if you can emulate and use his word, it will respond to you too, because it's not about you. It's about his word. It's about his character. And so God's preparing us to operate according to his example within the environment so that we can be successful. And so let's think of this on a smaller scale. In your life, God has placed you in multiple backdrops, and he's prepared those specific environments to respond to his word and his presence through you. Why am I here? Why did he even put me here among all these people that I don't like? Why would he even drop me in this place? Get me out of here, Lord God. It's because he's prepared those environments to respond to his presence and his word through you. And so follow the example of leadership that he gives you. Speak his words and steward the way he stewards. And as parents, as pastors, as leaders and ministers, whatever you are, even if you're a business owner, whatever you are, our calling isn't simply to build and be busy. Our calling is to prepare environments where others can thrive and encounter God so they can know what we know. And like Moses is reminding the Israelites of who they are and who God is, that's what we have to do. We have to remind people. We're the salt of the earth. We move like light sent by God to illuminate the earth. And even if you're not a leader, what is a leader? Even if you're not a leader in title, you're a leader in your identity and who God called you to be. So it doesn't matter what other people call you. It's about who God called you to be. And so don't forsake your creativity or your authority. Create from what's been placed inside of you. Just like God creates from what's inside of him. Light out of me be. And so maybe you've said an insecurity, we do it sometimes. Maybe you've said, I trust God, but I don't really trust myself. God has all this ability. I don't have any ability. And, I don't trust myself to just do things and, get out there and succeed. And maybe you've used that as an excuse to not go forward. And to that, I say, have faith in God enough to trust that he can lead even you to succeed in your tasks. So we have to be careful when we get into that woe is me. I can't do it. I can't do it. God can't use me, because that's actually pride in disguise. And pride says that your lack of ability or your lack of information or your general lack of know-how is too strong for God to conquer, to do anything with, or to overcome. So it's as if God has never met you. Do you think God does not sit with you every day? Do you think he doesn't look at you, have conversations with you? You think he doesn't know you already and what's in you and what's not in you? And so I heard someone say, you think God didn't plan around your stupidity when he called you? He already knew you were dumb. And for me, that really struck a chord with me. That radicalized me in a way. He knows I don't have it. But it's not about what I lack. It's not about what I don't have. It's about who I do have backing me. I have a backer. I have a mentor. I have an example. I have the word to repeat, because it's not about me, it's about God. And if I can just reflect him and act like him and say what he says, everything will respond as if he's the one who said it himself. And so do you believe that God's purpose for you can embrace your inadequacies? Do you believe that God's word is sharp enough to cut through your brain fog and to cause your environment to align with what he says? Because you should. All creation responds to him and his word. This entire universe that we're sitting in is held together by a word from him. And so speak his word if you want to see things in this universe move. And I dare you to try it. And so look at how this letter also looks bent over and weary. Some Jewish teachers say that this letter represents the possibility of poverty or spiritual bankruptcy. And it creates an interesting contrast, because when you think about it, God's creations are all perfect, but yet there's a duality there. Humanity has the capacity to walk away from God. Ooh, scary, right? Humanity has the capacity to walk away from God. And so we can stay or we can leave. We can do right or we can do bad. There's a duality there. And Genesis begins with potential. There's a potential for obedience. There's a potential for rebellion. It's like twisting the lid on a jar. You could turn left and lock in, or you can turn right and depart. And unfortunately, we all know the story. Humanity does fall. But let me show you the God we serve. He doesn't just let us go, and he doesn't throw us away. Before humanity was created, God saw the fall and still created us, giving us a home and access to himself. That's another reason why he starts with, there is a home and there's access. There's identity, there's safety, there's connection, there's a place you can go. Even when he's all knowing, he's omniscient. He knew it all before it started, and he still went through it and said, there's a home. And so he still loves us. He still gave us dominion. He still went through the whole process from beginning to end and said, I will give you things because I love you. And he still walked with us in that garden. He still took his time, as if nothing had ever happened, as if we'd never stabbed him, as if we'd never crucified him. He still walked beside us. And so the New Testament describes Christ as the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And that means that our redemption from a sinful state wasn't God's backup plan. It was something that he had always intended. It was in his heart before he created the earth. Redemption was already written and coded into our DNA before our creation and before the fall. And another way of thinking of that is, when God created Adam, he took Eve out of Adam, and then he took the rest of humanity out of Eve. And so David came out of Eve. Jesus came out of Eve. The answer is always in the seed. And so God coded the seed into our DNA. And so we were meant to reproduce after ourselves. And so redemption, that's what I mean by redemption, was already written and coded into our DNA before our creation and after the fall. And that's why it's so significant that God would walk with us. He would talk with us. He would give us dominion. He would still have these conversations and say, I'm trusting you. I still love you. I want you close to me still. And so before the failure, there was grace. Before the sin, there was mercy. There was love. Before Adam, there was Jesus. And so let's go to the next thing. If we look at the first two letters together, they make a new word. And this word can mean sun, grain, or pure. Now, I like to put my own, spin on things and give my own takeaways so that you can see where I'm coming from. And to me, when I see these things, I think of Jesus, because that's who I see. I see Jesus. I see the bread of life, grain, the bread of life. I see the Son of God, Son, the Son of God. I see the only pure and sinless man, pure. I think of communion when we eat his body, the bread of life. I think of how grain has represented nourishment and life, eternal life, the promise of a home, the invitation. And so I think of how through Jesus, we have eternal life. And some people say they can't see Jesus in the Old Testament, but I see Jesus. And the thing is, in my experience, when I try to show people Jesus in the Old Testament, like in Psalms, Isaiah, or even right now in Genesis, in one word, in the beginning, they don't always believe, they don't always see it. And sometimes they purposely look away. They say he's not there, or the message is not there, or that I'm reaching, And people expect evidence to look a certain way. And when evidence doesn't match their expectation of what evidence should look like in their mind, they conclude that the evidence is not there. And it's kind of like how some people claim racism isn't there unless it's in your face, unless it's obvious, unless it's spelled out and I can see it there, then it doesn't exist, is how they feel. And so sometimes racism is subtle and you have to look at the patterns to see it. It's like someone who's been through racism. It's like, I can see the patterns. I can hear it in the way they talk to me. I can hear it in their word choices. I've dealt with this for a while. I've read through it. I know racism when I hear and see racism. And just because it's not loud and in your face doesn't mean it's not dangerous. When it's quiet, it can be just as dangerous and present as loud racism is. And so that's how it feels with pointing out Jesus in the Old Testament. I'm trying to get you all to look at patterns and see that Jesus is there. In Genesis and throughout the Old Testament, not every page will say Jesus out loud. Someone might not scream the N-word, but it's there. I promise you it's there. And every page moves the story toward Jesus. And the Old Testament is not hiding Jesus. a lot of times you say, well, his name isn't in there. So it's not hiding him, it's introducing him. He shows up in the second act, but until the second act comes, we're talking about him. We're talking about why he's needed, why he's important. You have all these other characters coming up, and they're like, I sure wish that we had someone interceding for us to God. I sure wish that we had forgiveness of sins. I sure wish that we had peace and that we had, a Holy Spirit or something. It's like, I sure wish, oh gosh, if we would have had this, things would have been great. And then, ta-da, second act, here he is. And so the First Testament isn't hiding him, it's introducing him. And so we get to the next letter. And this letter represents strength, leadership, and firstness. So strength, leadership, firstness. Its numerical value is the number 1. This reminds us that there is only one true God. That brings us what we were talking about at the beginning. Creation is not God. The stars aren't God. The moon isn't God. Nature isn't God. The sun isn't God. The sea isn't God. Poseidon and all them people. There's only one God. And so there's one creator above everything he has made. Nothing in creation deserves your worship because everything points back to him. Go back to the origin of the stories and you'll see it all points to him. And so God gave me the visual of him setting up a beautiful table, elaborate, sprawled out, full of food, options, luxury. And instead of us saying, thank you, God, and enjoying it in fellowship with him, we pick up a fork and we get fascinated with it. And, it's like psychosis. People like to say we get spiritual psychosis for being Christian. I think we get spiritual psychosis from forgetting God. Because when you get hyper fixated on a fork, when the whole table spread is laid out among you, you have God right there. You could talk directly to him, but you're focused on the creation. You're focused on the fork. I think that's really spiritual psychosis. And so another part of that, God showed me that when you hyper focus on these things, you don't realize that you're wasting away. You don't notice it, but you're so fixated to the point that you forgot to eat from everything that he offered you. He set the spiritual gifts in front of you. He set the fruits of the Spirit in front of you. He set all of these things in front of you that you have access to, but you forgot to eat. You don't even notice it. So you're wasting away. You're starving. And so it's just so crazy that a father who cares about your nutrition, we talked about the bread of life, the water, the spring that will never run dry, he cares about, you should be tapping into that, And so it's just so crazy that he would try to redirect us by taking away the fork or removing us from the table, wilderness. I'm taking you from this. I'm taking this from you. Release it. We try to hold on to things so tightly. He's like, let go of the fork. Let go. And so that's what it's like when people worship created things and forget God. And so I want to move to the next letter. This letter is associated with fire, God's presence, God's peace, and God's name. And its shape looks like flames reaching upward. And so as we continue in this Bible journey, we'll begin to see more of God's presence revealed through fire. So like the burning bush, like the sacrifices when the fire consumes the sacrifice, like the pillars of fire, the fire on Mount Carmel, the tongues of fire at Pentecost. We see a whole lot of imagery of fire representing God's presence throughout the scriptures. And so Genesis plants some really good seeds that begin to bloom as you read throughout the rest of the Bible. And that's another reason why I love Genesis. And it shows me that God introduces himself long before we fully understand him. So he'll walk into the room and he'll shake your hand, and he'll tell you who he is, but you still don't have that full understanding of who he is until you walk with him. And so God can tell you exactly who he is at the start, but you still won't get it until he shows you, because you have to see it unfold to really get the depth of understanding of who he is. People told me you were this, but I didn't really get it until I saw it for myself. Until I went through it for myself and you popped up. I didn't know you were a provider until I was in need and you gave me something. You provided. So people ask all these questions of God, and it's not that he won't tell you, but you won't understand it even if he answers you. You have to unravel it. You have to live a little longer. You have to read a little further. You have to experience more. It's like when you're in your quiet time with God and you're pouring out your heart and, you're asking him questions and you're writing and stuff. He won't always give you all the answers right then. He might not even say anything major right then. He'll comfort you, but he might not give you anything substantial as far as an answer of what to do or anything like that. But he'll listen. And then time will pass, and then all of a sudden you'll hear something, or something will happen, or, a door will open. And it's like he's not hiding it from you, but you have to let time pass sometimes. You have to walk with him before things unravel and before you understand, oh, I know why you said that now. I know why you did that now. I know why you told me not to take that route, because if I had done that and not listened to you, oh man, I know exactly why. So he tells you, but you don't understand. And sometimes he don't tell you because you wouldn't have understood it anyway, but you'll understand it by and by. And so that's true in our lives too. You can hear the promise, but you might not fully appreciate it until years down the road. And so the next letter is on the screen. And this letter means hand, work, deed, or power. And it's the smallest Hebrew letter, yet it reminds us that God's hand God's hand is involved in every detail, even the smallest detail. So we're talking about the hand of God. Being touched by the hand of God in your situation, over your life, over your body, over your health, over your mind, over this world, over the people you care about, over your neighborhoods. And so Jesus referenced this very letter when he said, not one jot or tittle would pass away from the law. And when he's saying jot, he means this letter. When he's saying tittle, a tittle is a little dot over top of a lowercase I. And so he's looking at the littlest marks. He's looking at the littlest things. Like later on, a lot of you know, he knows the amounts of hairs that's on your head right now. He knows the smallest details about this universe, the smallest details about your country, about its leadership, about your neighborhood, about your family, about you. And so sometimes we think God only pays attention to big moments and big things and that we shouldn't waste his time, but that's not so. God cares about the small things just as much as he cares about the big things, and nothing will miss him, not even a little dot over top of an I. And so he cares about your details, and nothing in your life is too small. And so the next letter we have represents completion, fulfillment, truth, and a mark or a seal. And that tells me that God never starts something that he doesn't intend to finish. He stamps his seal. He gives us authority. He gives us dominion. And he says, here you go. I gave you power. Use it. Stamp your seal. He stamps his seal. We have his power. And so he completes what he begins. He doesn't start something without fulfilling it. If he sends a word to go out, it does not come back to him unfulfilled. And so if God has created a work in you, or started building something within you, or started a transition within you, don't lose heart before he's finished writing the story. Walk it out and let it unfold. Don't stop halfway through, because if it's halfway, then it's not complete. And if you're not at victory, then the story isn't over. And so then the verse says, we're going to move on. The verse says, God created. In the beginning, God created. The Hebrew word for created is on the screen, and that's a verb used to express God's creative activity. So people can build, we can invent, we can rearrange things, we can discover, but only God creates in the way that Genesis describes. So we can create, but we don't create in the way that God creates in Genesis, because when we create, there's a difference. Every artist begins with materials. We have a paint set, we have charcoal, we have, Copic markers, whatever, pick your poison. You have materials. Every builder begins with supplies. You have straw, you have mud, you have mortar, whatever it is, you have stone, you have supplies. Every inventor begins with existing elements. You have a 3D printer, whatever you have. You start with something. But when we get to God, the original creator, he does not need materials. He doesn't need supplies. He doesn't need the existing elements. He begins with himself. Everything he ever created was first wrapped up in him. And all he said was, let there be. And so that's why your lack has never intimidated him. Your lack has never intimidated him, because he doesn't need your resources to begin with. He's the infinite source. And so when he calls you to do something and you say, but I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have that together. He's like, did I ask you any of that? Did I ever ask you for anything? Did I ever ask you for anything? And then God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates everything that's above. He creates everything that's below. So that means he created the sky, the cosmic expanse, the wilderness, the fields, the world, the visible, the invisible, the spiritual realm, the physical realm, all of it. That's what we're talking about when we say the heavens and the earth, all of it. Nothing exists outside of God's authority. If you can think of it, he created it. So he's not a part of creation. He's Lord over it. Gravity, time, space, all of it, dimensions. And so here's the thought that I want you to leave with just from the first verse alone. Genesis doesn't begin by telling us who we are. It begins by showing us who God is. It begins with telling us you have a home. You have a place to go. This is who I am. This is who I created you to be. This is what love is. This is what it means to steward. This is what it means to lead. Because if we misunderstand the creator, we start to misunderstand creation's role in things, and we start to misunderstand our own roles. We start to not understand our own identities and what we're supposed to be doing. And so before you ask, who am I? Ask, who is God? Because once you answer that question and you know who created you, you finally understand who you are and whose you are and why you were created and what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be operating. So that said, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the content. It'll keep coming. So stay curious, stay grounded, and most importantly, stay in the Word. Thank you.